Here we go. Get ready. I call to order the August Finance Committee meeting. If the Secretary please call the roll.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Adams. Here. Councilmember McIntosh.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Okay. Due to the safer at home order, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there is a vote, it will be necessary to take a roll call vote. A committee member will be recognized and will raise their hand and state their vote. Thank you all for being here today. Start with, I've had requests to remove items C9 and C13 from consideration. The staff wants to deal with those a little bit more. So without objection, we will remove C9 and C13. With that, we will move to the consent items first, and I'll ask council members if there are any they want removed. Ms. Adams has already given me C1, C15, and C18. Does anyone else have anything they want removed?
C6.
C6? Okay. Anyone else, either members or other council members listening?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Larson.
Yes, could I see C12 and 14? I believe 15's already been pulled.
Okay, so let me just repeat them. C1, C6, C12, 14, and 15, and then 9 and 13 have been removed. Hearing none, or in 18, yeah. Ms. Adams has moved for approval of the balance. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. McIntosh. I will now call the roll to vote on it. Mayor Pro Tem Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
He's yes, and the chair is yes. So those are approved. We will take the items removed from consent in numerical order, starting with C1. If the Secretary will please read that one.
Item C1, consideration of items relating to the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget ordinances for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Ordinance amending the annual appropriation and tax levy ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina for the fiscal year 2020-2021, and ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina for the fiscal year 2020-2021.
Thank you. Ms. Adams, you asked for this. I'll give you the floor.
Just so that the mayor and council know that the staff and the city manager will be bringing forth a Budget 101 virtual summit or conference over the next couple of weeks to be aired for the community to understand a deeper, dive of what our budget means. We will start with the police budget and public safety, and then we'll move to housing and then community development and whatever else that the council or the community deems that we need to educate them on. The first item that I just want for clarity for the citizens is the police department. I think it's the third item in the C1, and it mentions that we got money from the Office of the State Auditor and the Department of Justice. It lists what the funds are going to be used for, but again, we get to the very end and it says purchase of equipment. Can someone please tell me what that equipment is or could be?
Does any staff member want to comment on C1 on what the equipment that's being purchased for the police department is?
Chairman Clark.
Yes, Mr. Rao, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of the City Council. We can provide you the details on exactly what equipment will be purchased with those funds. I know Ms. Tony is also participating in the meeting. I'll defer to her if she has those details.
Ms. Tony, are you around?
We'll be glad, Mayor Pro Tem, to get you the details of the list of equipment they plan to purchase.
Okay, so we will have that in the information for the meeting next week, for the council meeting next week.
Yes.
Also, Chair Clark.
Thank you. Keep going.
In the next item, it's about the Jocelyn B. Johnson Municipal Services Center. And it says that we have concerns with the roof.
Yes.
Can somebody tell me or the audience what those concerns are about the roof when the building is not quite, 5 years old?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Adams. So the roof has a number of issues with leaks and some structural issues. And so that's part of what's driving the cost in for the property insurance for that facility.
I will say that building, this is the old, the one on Lowry, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, that building is at least 50 years old. I don't know how old the roof is,
Yeah.
but the building, my brother worked there in high school.
So are we talking about describe the roof is the original roof, or is it a roof that we did repairs to, and so was it the quality of the work, the scope of the work that caused us to have to deal with the rating of the insurance?
So, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, I can get you some additional information there. I mean, I know that the section that's over the recycling company still is experiencing, leaks. So I know there are issues with sections of the roof that are not over our finished space, but I can provide you with some additional information about that. It's not just the roof, but also just general market conditions as well. That's driving the premium cost for this facility.
Yeah,
And my
go ahead.
last comment or question is the item under the ballpark capital maintenance. Can you just tell citizens what are some of these repairs that we are responsible for versus the ones that we're not responsible for? Just what the ones are that we are responsible for.
Yes, ma'am. So the city is generally responsible for replacement of elements of the facility. So, whether it's, the structure itself, concrete repairs, those types of parts of the facility, anything that's a revenue generating asset. So, for example, the scoreboard, the team would be responsible for maintaining and replacing that. So any revenue generating asset would be the team's responsibility. Beyond that, replacing the field, replacing the walls, so like I said, structural repairs, those would be the responsibility of the city.
Thank you, Chairman Clark. I have no more concerns.
Okay. Actually, the ballpark's under C-15, but while we're there, I believe we're getting some money from the state from the Peters Creek project.
Yes, sir. So with that particular item, when the state acquired some parcels, city parcels and easements for the work that would be done there on Peters Creek near the ballpark, part of that was taking the fencing and the landscaping. And so the funds that the city received for those takings, we're using it to pay for the solid fencing that will be installed there along the Peters Creek side of the stadium.
Do you know if that's going to pay for all of it or most of it or what percent?
It will. The original cost of what they call the takings, the fencing and the landscaping, was about $175,000. The city overall received over $1 million for all the parcels and the easements that were in that area. So the fencing is going to cost a little over $102,000. So the reimbursements will be sufficient to pay for the fencing.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I know.
With that, as far as C1, given that we're going to get information on both the police money and the roof, I would suggest we move that forward without recommendation, so it'll be on the general agenda, if that's okay.
That's good.
Can I get a motion to move C1 forward? Move forward without recommendation. Can I get a second on that one?
Second.
We have a second. We will then have a roll call vote on C1 to move forward without a recommendation, and that it be on the general agenda for the Monday night meeting. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, that is approved. That's C1. I will now go to C15.
C6 was.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, you're right. I didn't write them down numerically. C6, if the secretary please read that one, please.
Item C6, consideration of items regarding the 2020 Burn Justice Assistance Grant Resolution authorizing an interlocal agreement between the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and the County of Forsyth, North Carolina, to share a 2020 Burn Justice Assistance Grant Program Award. Ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the City of Winston-Salem for fiscal year 2020-2021.
Mr. Taylor, you asked this to be removed. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and council. I wanted to bring this item up for a brief discussion. Item C6 is an item that accepts a little over $192,000 in JAG dollars to be split evenly between the Sheriff's Department and between the Winston-Salem Police Department. The Sheriff's Department is looking to use their portion of the grant dollars, which is a little bit over $96,000, to purchase real-time cameras and related video software. The police department, as you see in your notes, will be using the money to purchase small surveillance cameras in the amount of $8,400 and other items for office supplies and field equipment. Given the increase in recent gun violence, I know many of you have been trying to find ways to find solutions. I wonder if it may be wiser for us to use our share of the grant dollars to purchase real-time cameras and install them in areas such as Cleveland Avenue, Salem Gardens, Rolling Hills, and other areas of the city that may have high crime, and use those cameras to gather information on those who are frankly terrorizing the neighborhood with drug activity and gun violence. What we find, when I say we, I mean the police department, what we find is when we go out and talk to folks in the community when a crime is committed, there are people who know about it, but they just won't talk about it out of fear of retaliation. I believe that if we had real-time cameras or some other way to deal with it, it would eliminate the need for the community to come forward solely and rely on other forms of technology. So item C1 we just discussed will allocate $76,710 for the purchase of police equipment. We're going to get the list of that equipment, but I'm just asking if we could consider instead of purchasing those office supplies with these grant dollars, that we can use that $96,000 to purchase real-time cameras to deal with gun violence and drug activity in many of our high crime areas of the community.
Let me ask this of, I guess, Assistant City Manager Logan Ford, if she's on.
I am.
Do we have to specify in this motion what it's used for, or just approve the splitting of the money?
Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee, typically we do specify what we're spending the dollars on. What I can do with staff is go back and actually look at what it would take for us to use a portion of these dollars to support adding some real-time video and real-time cameras in neighborhoods. There is some other ancillary costs associated with that program in terms of infrastructure that would be needed to make sure that we can get that feedback to our center, as well as being able to have the staff available to monitor this service. So I would lean a little bit of time just to talk with the police department staff to figure out what we could do to be able to shift some of those dollars to support having cameras in those neighborhoods and that Councilmember Taylor has identified.
Okay, but get back to my first question. If we're simply approving splitting the money with the county, could we not just vote on that and then come back later with a specific spending resolution?
Well, typically, Chairman, let me get back to you on that. All the other times that we've allocated these dollars, we've specifically listed the equipment that would be purchased when it's gone before council. We may be able to make this adjustment prior to Monday, but I'll just need to have that conversation with staff. Okay,
Mr. McIntosh had a comment.
I wanted to ask WSPD what their thoughts are on our ability to actually implement what Councilmember Taylor is asking for. I'm all for it. I agree with him 100%. But we've had significant issues of finding people who will let us co-locate when we've been trying to do this in our original pilot areas. So I'm all for it, but I just would like to find out if we think that's something we can actually do.
Is there anyone from the police department? Chief Thompson, are you on by chance?
I have Assistant Chief Miles. I have Assistant Chief Miles that's with us that can respond to that question, Chairman Clark.
Okay.
You can go ahead and start. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and other city council members. This is Chief Weaver is here. To my left is Chief Penn and Chief Miles is to my right. Chief Miles will be answering that question, please.
Okay.
Chairman Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Adams, and distinguished council members and guests. We have applied for a grant, the Strategies in Policing grant, for our cameras for the Real-Time Crime Center. And we're hopeful that we'll hear back from regarding that grant in the next month or so as to whether or not we were awarded the grant. That grant is in the amount of $700,000. That would also help outfit our Real-Time Crime Center. We have partnered with Fusus Technology on a pilot program. We have some cameras existing right now, and we partnered with some businesses, apartment complexes, one being Housing Authority, one being Federal Court, and one being Cleveland, Salem Gardens. We are utilizing their cameras right now with the project pilot program, and we are seeing the benefit in having these cameras in place. We have also applied for a grant and been awarded the funding for the Fusus project, the cameras for that project as we go along. Okay, so we have applied for a grant to cover, my apologies, we have applied for a grant to cover the cost of cameras for that Fusus project. And again, we do see the benefit of having these cameras in place. And Amy, if you don't mind, do you know how much that grant was for the Fusus?
The total grant, the Real-Time Crime Center includes the $700,000 that you mentioned. We allotted $54,000 in the grant for the Fusus cameras.
Okay, so there's $54,000 allotted in that Strategies in Policing grant for cameras.
Okay. Let me suggest, is this on the agenda for public safety tomorrow?
It is. Yeah, it is today.
Oh, this afternoon. Well, there's no way they're going to get it ready between now and 6 o'clock whenever we finish. Ms. Logan Ford, do you think you will have time between now and next week to assess this? Because I think Mr. McIntosh has got a good point, and also you got to look at what it costs. I'm assuming if this camera feed is going up to the cloud, there's a storage cost associated with that.
There is.
So we really need a thorough understanding of it. How about if I suggest?
Chairman Clark, I think what would be helpful if the committee is agreeable to see the grants that the department has applied for and the equipment that's covered by those grants, to be able to show that to the committee. And that way you can see what has been applied for to support the camera projects,
okay,
in addition to what's being requested through this JAG grant.
Okay, so if we can include that in the information you get for next Monday night, and if you could supply it to Mr. Taylor ahead of time in case he has any specific questions.
We will.
Mr. Chairman.
Is this thing time sensitive? Do we have to approve it next week?
I would ask Chief Weaver if he could respond to that in terms of the timeliness for applying for these dollars and submitting our information on the JAG grant.
In reference to the JAG grant, the application has to be applied for before August 19th. Typically, once we get the application in, it takes about a year or so before the funds actually become available. The JAG grant is a non-competitive grant, which means that we won't have to compete for it. We just have to apply for it, and we'll typically give them what we apply for.
Okay, but what we're voting on in C6 is the Burn Justice Assistance Grant. Is that time sensitive?
That's it. That's the JAG grant.
Oh, it's the JAG grant. Excuse me. Okay.
Yes,
I say Justice Assistance. Okay. So we need to keep this on the agenda. So I'm going to ask that we get a motion to approve it. And Mr. Taylor, hopefully we can get you information between now and next Monday night. And we can certainly, again, I might ask that this be put on the general agenda versus the consent agenda. Can I, Ms. Taylor, is that okay with you?
I think it's cool to move forward, but I just want to make one point. There is no guarantee that we'll receive the other grant in the amount of $700 and something odd dollars. But
good point.
This one is almost, a slam dunk. And I think with the crime and violence we've experienced, we have to do something. I know Councilmember Scipio would agree. We had a conversation this weekend. So, I mean, we need this now more than ever. So to put it off for something in the future does give me a little bit of concern.
Okay. So let's move it forward, get it on general agenda for Monday night so that we can talk about it. It is important that we vote on it so we get the money, but then we also need to be sure we're spending it. for the best value we can get. So if Mr. Taylor, would you mind moving? Wait a minute, Mr. Larson would like to say something. Excuse me.
Can I be clear about this? Are we having two grants to cover the same topic? Are we submitting, we got the burn grant or the JAG grant, and we've got another grant in the works, and it's basically being proposed to cover the same material?
The JAG grant and the burn grant are the same. So that's only one. They are submitting another grant, which from what I just heard is probably a year out as far as the decision making on it, that would be used. Currently, there's no overlap, but there's no guarantee we get the second grant.
Chairman Clark, the JAG grant that's on the item that we're discussing now is C6. This is the grant that typically takes us about a year to work through that process. The grant for the $700,000 that they've applied for previously to support the camera project, is my understanding that grant, we're still waiting to hear back from that, and we hope to hear something within the next month or so.
Okay.
With that said, it would be my recommendation, if you're asking, Mr. Chairman, can we move this forward also without a recommendation until we get the information?
We can do that.
Okay.
Hang on just a minute. Okay, yeah. Can I get a motion to move this forward without recommendation?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
I will now do a roll call on the vote for C6 and move forward without recommendation. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ms. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. So C4 is moved forward without recommendation. Well, thank you, Mr. Taylor. That was C6. We'll now go to C12.
Item C12, resolution awarding purchase order for heavy-duty low-floor hybrid electric buses to New Flyer of America Incorporated.
Ms. Adams, is this one yours?
Mr. Chairman, is mine.
Ms. Larson, you can comment on this. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just two quick comments. One is this will be, I assume, looked at very shortly under Public Works as well. I want to compliment the bus company. This is all COVID money, as I understand, being used to purchase these vehicles. So there's no expenses to our operating budget. Second of all, I am curious about what this means to our route and our after the Salem Parkway has been opened and the route changes that incurred, what we're planning to do to sustain any of those levels of service. Maybe by tomorrow's meeting, we can get a little briefing on what these buses, how these buses are going to be incorporated into the bus route system.
Okay. Mr. DeCane, would you like to comment on this? It's in your area.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee, members of the City Council. Certainly, Councilmember Larson, we can discuss further at Public Works tomorrow evening. Right now, the current plan for these 8 vehicles is they will be replacements for existing vehicles that are nearing their useful life. So 12 years, 500,000 miles is the lifespan of a transit vehicle. And so we don't intend to use these for route enhancement or anything like that. And it'll be difficult for us to continue to extend the added services due to the Salem Parkway construction. We will retain 5 buses. We're going to surplus 8, but we're going to do some switching of cards in the deck there to keep 5 as a reserve fleet so that we don't have to interrupt service when a vehicle goes down. And as the pandemic continues, we use those buses as a relief for a route that may have more than 15 riders at a stop. So we pick up 15 and then we have an immediate relief vehicle pulling behind to keep those folks on their schedules.
One other comment. My understanding is these are hybrid buses. Are they replacing hybrid buses, or are we getting, or is our fleet being upgraded from internal combustion engines?
I'll have to defer to Ms. Woodson, who I believe is on the call, to answer that one.
Ms. Woodson, are you there?
We can have this information tomorrow. We'll be fine.
Okay. Mr. McIntosh, you had a comment?
We've had some conversation about, do we have the right mix of 35-foot buses and smaller buses, especially as we came into the COVID experience where we were seeing ridership being down so much. I'm assuming that has been thought of before replacing this order. Does it make sense to get all new 35-footers, or can we be more efficient by possibly getting more vehicles that are smaller? Again, I'll leave that up to staff to figure out, but I just want to know that we've looked at it.
Yes, sir. It's Councilmember McIntosh. That's been looked at. These are the appropriate replacements for the service level that we need to maintain.
Okay. I understand this is the Finance Committee. We're just here approving the replacement of buses. I really think it's up to the Public Works Committee to work with the bus system as far as routing, optimization, and things of that sort. So with that, can I get a motion on C14 from, C12? We have a motion to have a second to approve the bus purchase.
Second.
We have a second on C12. We'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
And Mr. Clark votes yes. I will make a comment. I did talk with Ben about this. Please keep in mind that these buses are $350,000 more than a diesel bus. I certainly hope they are worth that. There's a lot more energy goes into make a hybrid bus than it does a regular bus. That's why they cost more. There's obviously savings in gasoline, but Ben has assured me that it does. But bear in mind, we can buy almost not quite 2 buses, regular buses, than we can for the price of 1. But anyway, that is approved. We will now go to, I have C14 next.
Item C14, resolution awarding purchase order for police pursuit vehicles to Asheville Ford LLC.
Ms. Logan Ford, this is a change in policy. We're moving the type of vehicle we're purchasing. Would you mind commenting on that, or if there's someone else out there that's more appropriate?
Chairman Clark, I'll ask Assistant Chief Penn if he would respond to the item on the police vehicles.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and Chairman Clark. The reason for the change in vehicles is just the need. All of the major car manufacturers have moved from sedans, and there's just no other sedans we can get. So we looked at SUVs, and we found that the Ford SUV gave us much of what we needed for the most economic and cost as well.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Adams, did you pull this?
I pulled it, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
Mr. Larson, do you have any questions?
Yes, first of all, let me say that I think this is very exciting to see 60 new police cars joining the fleet. It's going to be a whole new image. I think maybe tomorrow at the public safety, or I don't know if this afternoon, but it's a new look, and it'd be nice for the public to get a look at that maybe before they start arriving. So if we could have a little publicity or picture of that somewhere along the line. It's an interesting look, and I'm excited to have it. Sort of in response along the lines of what we saw for the hybrid buses. I do have some interest in our sustainability and environmental impact. We have, how many vehicles? 500 vehicles in the police department?
We have roughly 400 vehicles that are part of patrol.
400 out on patrol. So it's a major fleet, and it's a major part of our carbon footprint, I think, in the city as we run our vehicles. And I hope that at some point we can look at the sustainability program within that purchase program.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Any other questions or comments on C14, police car? Ms. Adams.
I would be interested to hear the Winston-Salem PD staff comment on what Charlotte and Raleigh have seen with the purchase or the transition to the SUV. Just a few comments. What have they said? They like them? Issues? What?
Good question. Well, one of the assistant police chiefs comment on the kind of the research you did on this.
Yes, ma'am. Charlotte has gone to SUVs 100% as far as patrol vehicles, and that's worked very well for them. They are replacing them before it reaches its lifespan, so they've had no issues. And Raleigh, much like we would be, are doing. They have the sedans as well as the SUVs, with supervisors having the SUVs and eventually moving that into the fleet.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. With that, I don't believe I have a motion yet on this, do I? Can I get a motion to approve C14?
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve C14, which is the new police SUV vehicles. Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Ms. Clark, yes. Thank you very much. C14 is done. We will now go to C15. By the way, read this in and then I'll make a comment.
Item C15, consideration of items related to screen fence installation at Truist Stadium. Resolution ordering contract for installation of screen fence at Truist Stadium to Seagar's Fence Company of Greensboro Incorporated.
Okay.
Ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem for the fiscal year 2020-2021.
We have already had some discussion on this, but since we need to officially vote on it, or any other comments that would like to be made on C15?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes. After reading the other consent item about the ballpark, and it said that we are responsible for the maintenance, certain types of maintenance. I'm just wondering, for me, is this necessary, or is this because of the construction on the parkway? I mean, is it necessary because it says concerns have been raised about the impact of the work and will have on the fans' perception in regards to food safety? There aren't any games, there's no season. I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, baseball, will it come back the way we think? And Chair Clark, I just need some.
Okay. Mr. Rao, would you comment on that?
Yes, sir. So this project was initiated at the request of the Dash, and this was probably well over a year ago when obviously we didn't know that we would be facing a pandemic. But Peters Creek Parkway, or the new road, was encroaching a little bit closer to the stadium, and the team officials had concerns that with the Carolina plan concession stand being right there on the third base side, that it was going to be closer to the road. There was concern about fumes, possibly debris. And right now, there was just the wrought iron fencing that was originally there, and so part of the plan that once the road work was done was to restore the fencing. In that area, the team has decided they don't need to restore the fencing that was along Silas Creek Parkway. So they knew there would be some savings, that could be applied towards an upgraded fencing that they felt like would improve the fan experience, since the road would be that much closer to the stadium. And so that's why this item's coming forward, is to construct this solid fencing to provide a better fan experience.
Ben, do you know if there's any other stuff we need to do? Because the Salem Parkway is finished now. Now they're still working on some of particularly the aesthetics in that area, planting grass and stuff. But do you know of any other cleanup we need from the stadium?
Well, in this particular item, there is a diagram showing, where the solid fencing will be constructed, and you can see beyond that as you move towards, I think it's First Street. It says future fence by others. That would be installing the wrought iron fencing that was removed on out, the third base side of the field. So that's something that will happen in the future. I'm not exactly sure of the funding on that. I think that might be something that'll be restored as part of the overall project, but I don't know that 100%. So you can see that the solid fencing would run from the VIP entrance, which is noted as number 1, all the way to the end of the canopy.
Yeah, but what you're showing is future fence by others. When I exit the ball stadium, I usually go down the third base side. There's a brick wall there. I'm assuming that's still there?
It's still there. It's still there. But this fencing...
behind it?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. But that's not included in this proposal?
That's not included in this proposal. The focus of this project would simply be the green segment.
Green segment. Okay. All right. Seems like you need that just to have privacy of the ballpark.
But there's nobody there.
I know that. Well, not now. Hopefully there will be.
Not today.
Yeah. Any other comments on C15? I mean, my point is I think the field needs to be enclosed, so you have to have a ticket to attend, just crowd control and all that. Any other questions on this one?
Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
To staff, based on the state of the economy, particularly our state of economy here in the city, do we really need to do this right now? Staff.
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Pro Tem Adams. So this project has, as I mentioned, this project's been in the works for a while now. That's a very good question. I know that with there not being any activity, it raises the issue whether we should do it. The funding for this project is coming from a reimbursement to restore what was removed as part of the project. So we wouldn't be utilizing any city tax dollars to carry out this project. And quite honestly, with there not being any activity in the stadium right now, to do a construction project like this probably times out favorably because there wouldn't be obviously any disruption to games or just in terms of the site of an area under construction. So that's why we're proceeding.
Did I hear you clearly say that the money is not coming from the general fund or any city's money, that this money was it given to us by DOT or anybody?
Yes, ma'am. This money is not coming from the general fund. It's not coming from city bond dollars. This is coming from the proceeds that the state paid the city for acquiring parcels in that Peters Creek interchange area and for removing the fencing that was there originally. There was wrought iron fencing all along that side of the stadium. So it was basically a reimbursement from the state for that. So we're using those same funds now to help restore the fencing in that area. And in this case, it'll be an upgrade from the wrought iron fencing.
But being right now, if that's the case, you could walk right into the stadium if there's no fencing there, right?
Well, I'm trying. I think right now there might still be the wrought iron fencing. They removed the wrought iron fencing that was on the Silas Creek side.
Okay.
I think they still have some temporary fencing along that area. So that's why we want to proceed with this project.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I have no issue with moving the motion.
Okay.
Because once they explained to me that the money was from DOT and it was funds given us for the construction of the parkway.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Mr. Larson, you had a comment?
Yes. Are there any other restrictions on the money that was given by DOT for reimbursement? Does this money have to be dedicated to the ballpark area?
So, Councilmember Larson, the city received over $1.05 million in all the acquisitions that the state made. This piece of it is going to amount to about $102,000. The council action that the mayor and council approved some time ago that approved the sale of the land and the easements to the state that basically stated that anything over and above, any revenues that remain over and above doing any of the restoration work on the fencing would be applied toward the multi-use path.
Okay. That was the question, really. Multi-use path. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Ms. Adams has made a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a second. We'll now vote. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
And Ms. Clark votes yes. So that is C15. That one is done. We will now go to C18.
Item C18, resolution awarding construction contract for Bethania Freedman's Park to Granico Incorporated.
Ms. Adams?
Chairman Clark and staff, recently I received an email about some historical items and concerns with this park, with the fire station. Have we resolved that? Or is this, help me understand, because the citizens are concerned, they live in the area. Have we resolved the issue of possible historical intrusion to the property, to the Bethania Freedman's area?
Mayor Pro Tem Adams, there were some conversations that this staff in planning, our historical resources staff, had with residents early on. The area that was in question was brought to our attention by the Hartleys, that family. And there was a location along that road improvement by the fire station where they were concerned about losing some of the historical references of that park. It's my understanding that after staff had some conversations with them that they were comfortable moving forward, or at least staff was comfortable with moving forward. And there was some discussion about how to commemorate that history in the park. So they were also designing some panels that would include historical references that could speak to past uses of that area and to really pay homage to individuals that were connected to that park and document the historic significance of Thelma Kroger Small and the garden that was at that location. So that has been handled at this point by the planning staff. So it's my understanding that we were comfortable moving forward unless there's some new information that has come since that time.
Thank you. I'm also going to ask Councilmember Scipio and the African American Commission if they would be so willing to aid and assist the residents of the family Freeland on their path to do the panels and whatever other restoration is needed. I think it's important that the African American Commission is involved with that.
Okay.
And with that, for motion.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve C18. I will now vote. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor? What you do with him?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor is yes, and the chair votes yes. Thank y'all very much. That's all the consent that I have. Unless someone else has got something else. We will now move. By the way, we're going to end. I haven't mentioned this since we're doing all this virtually. We do need to end on time because the next group will be coming in. We have 7 general items. We will start with G1. If the secretary please read that one.
Item G1, consideration of items relating to an economic development loan to Front Street Capital. Resolution approving an economic development loan to Front Street Capital and an ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem for fiscal year 2020-2021.
Mr. Raleigh, would you please tee this up for us?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Chairman Clark, and members of the council. This item is a request from Front Street Capital for a loan of up to $2.5 million to help construct a speculative building that be located on Wahlberg Road, actually directly adjacent to the entrance of Union Cross Business Park. And there is an attachment in your items that makes note of the location of this proposed speculative building. If you're not familiar with Front Street Capital, they are a Winston-Salem based firm that's primarily focused on the development of commercial real estate. They've done several projects, not only in Winston-Salem, but in the Triad area. Front Street Capital is proposing to use the city's contribution, if approved, to help it finance the construction of the speculative building, which would be 250,000 square feet with expansion capabilities. It is anticipated that this facility will have an initial aggregate value of about $12 million. The developers have indicated that once the building is occupied, that value could reach $15 million. The facility is, once constructed, the idea is to market it to cities that are seeking to, or companies that are seeking to relocate to Winston-Salem from outside of the area. And of course, the developers would be repaying the city's loan upon the occupation of the completed facility. We do have several representatives from Front Street. I think I see you on the call to answer any specific questions you have. I believe Mr. Coleman team, Robin team, Alston team are here from Front Street Capital. We may also have, I believe, representation from Greater Winston-Salem, Inc. That is here in support of the project. So I will pause and respond to any questions you have about the project.
Okay. If the folks out there on hold. If you will just be patient, we'll see if there's any questions or comments that come up. Mr. Raleigh, haven't we done business with Front Street before?
We have, Chairman Clark. Recently as I think April of 2015, we partnered with Front Street to develop a speculative building out at Union Cross Industrial Center. This request essentially recycles the money that they repaid as part of that deal into the construction of another speculative building. So, yes.
So they have built a building and paid us back?
Yes, they have.
Okay. The mayor had a comment. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to say, Mr. Raleigh covered it very well, but the fact that we've had good experience doing this type of arrangement where we've advanced the funds to a developer. The building was built, it was occupied, we got repaid, and just kind of, in a way, recycling that money. This will give us a 200,000 square foot building expandable with 300,000. And as we know, we need that inventory in order to be able to recruit our companies or really help existing companies to expand. Very little risk to the city. We'll have a building there. We got first lien on it. We get repaid in full when the building is sold, or 5 years, whichever comes soonest. So I think it's a good use of our economic development strategy, and I would highly recommend it.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the mayor's comments, and I really appreciate the fact that in a pretty uncertain commercial real estate market that Front Street's is willing to step up and build a building here. I know the CMBS markets are pretty tough right now, and if we can help jumpstart something and get a product out there and bring something into Winston and bring jobs, I'm all for it. So thanks for the good work, guys.
Thank you. Ms. Scipio, you had a question or comment?
Yes. I think this economic development investment is always a good thing for our city, but I know a lot of people don't understand the outcomes of them. And so I would like if Mr. Raleigh or someone else in the city could tell us at some point in time just how successful we have been in all of the investments we've made to build speculative buildings, and then people have come in, we've had employment, a tax base has increased. I think that's the kind of information that would be good to share with the community, to let them know that this is not just giving money away. There is an outcome that comes back that's very beneficial to us. So at some point, I like to have that for the public.
Staff, if we could have that for Monday night, I can think of 3 or 4 buildings in either Union Cross or 411 Business Park that we fronted money and were repaid. So if we could just get some historical information, good point, Ms. Scipio. Mr. Taylor, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've had a significant amount of success with creating jobs and opportunities in the southeastern portion of the city, as was stated here just a moment ago. Ultimately, it's been good for the city at large. To Councilmember Scipio's point, to date, we've invested over $20 million in creating some of these projects, which has yielded over 1,600 jobs and $655 million to the tax base just from the opportunities from the southeastern portion of the city. If we want to continue our success, I think we've got to continue to make investments and create those jobs. I do have a few questions. Based on the staff report, it appears that we move into second position if a third-party construction loan was necessary. I'm trying to figure out from staff, $2.5 million doesn't sound like a lot on the grand scheme of things, but how do we remain in first position on the loan?
Mr. Rob?
Yes, Councilman Taylor, I think there may be a challenge just depending on the size of the loan. I would actually probably look to the developers to speak to what potential complications might arise from the city retaining that first lien position in terms of their ability to attract the remainder of the capital stack needed to finance the facility. So I'd look to someone from Front Street to.
Would one of the team folks like to comment? Coleman or?
Sure, I'll take that. In our first spec building that we used these funds for, we funded the entire speculative building with all cash. We did not use any proceeds from a bank to be able to fund that. Since this is a significantly larger, it'd be 2.5 times as large as the first building, We may look to use some small degree of debt on this deal, basically the same size as the city loan. So probably only $5 million in debt out of a $15 million equity need to fund this project. The bank, to do business with us, would require first position. This is something that we can look to talk about, but we will be out of pocket $10 million in equity before any of that debt structure comes into play. If Robin, you want to comment anything further, but since this is, the first building was a little bit smaller, we expect this one to be 12.5 to 15 million. So it was, and where debt markets are right now, it would be silly for us not to interject some form of bank debt. But Rob, any further comments?
Well, like you said, Coleman, we're going to have $10 to $12 million worth of our equity in the land and in this building construction that would obviously be subordinate to the city loan. About $7 to $8 million of it would be on this specific project, not counting the underlying value of the dirt, which is another $1.8 million.
Okay, thank you.
A few more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Taylor, go right ahead. Thank you.
We have a responsibility to be good stewards of the tax dollars, so you can understand why we want to be in first position, because if something popped off, we want to get our money back first. So also the jobs, I understand we need to pay a livable wage for Forsyth County. What is the livable wage that's being required? And I say this because it's a follow-up to my next question.
Well, Councilmember Taylor, in response to that, typically what we will include as the livable wage in these economic development agreements matches what the city's city's minimum wage is. That's typically been our practice. So in this case, I know that there's an item on the agenda contemplating what that minimum wage might be, but generally speaking, it will mirror, the language of the agreement will mirror whatever minimum wage the organization is currently paying.
Okay. Two more questions. I'll ask swiftly, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
The last bullet point in our staff report requires any new tenant or purchaser to create at least 5 new jobs within 5 years of occupying or purchasing the facility. I'm just trying to figure out why is the number of jobs that we'd be requiring so low after 5 years?
Councilmember Taylor, honestly, that language was holdover from the original contract. Well, not the original, but the last contract that we executed for an agreement like this had this language. So essentially, this is just a recitation of the language that we used for the previous agreement. It certainly could be amended upwards to some degree. As you'll see noted in the item, the last speculative building that we invested in created 65 plus jobs. So, in all actuality, a facility of this size is going to generate well in excess of the 5 jobs that's noted, but that's just, was just taken from that agreement.
I thought so, Mr. Raleigh, but it was important to bring that point out just for information purposes. And lastly, the $2.5 million is going to be coming from the Economic Development Loan Fund. You don't have to tell me now, but I'm going to be interested to know what is the balance of that loan fund, just so we can keep our eyes on future projects. But I support this particular project. It makes sense. The jobs have been created in that area for us to continue to ride that train. So I'd move for approval at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Mayor had a comment?
Yeah, just wanted to reiterate what the Coleman team said. With a $15 million project, only $5 million total debt if necessary. And if that happened, we'd only have about 16% of the total project cost ahead of us if something went south. We're well protected in that. So I certainly support Councilmember Taylor's motion to approve this.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, Mr. Taylor has made a motion to approve. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve G1. I will do roll call vote. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Mr. Clark? Yes. To all the team, family, thank y'all for investing in our city, and best of luck with it.
Thank you.
We will now go to G2.
Item G2, presentation on revenue update.
Ms. Tony and Mr. Rao, I've got both y'all names here. Who would like to start?
Chairman Clark, I'm going to defer to Ms. Tony.
Ms. Tony, you're up. You have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Jones, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Chairman Clark, members of the committee and council. As part of the FY budget planning process, we were asked to provide regular updates on major revenues impacting the city. So in your agenda package and on the screen, you'll see charts of the revenues. So the first chart is of the general fund revenues. And I'll just point out that each month we'll update the charts and graphs that you'll see in this report as we get additional information. The first column shows all of the general fund revenues. The second column is our FY20 actuals. The third column is the FY21 budgeted amount, what we budgeted for this upcoming year. The fourth column is the FY20 year to date. So any revenues that we receive year to date will be on that column. The next column is the FY21 projected, and the last column will show the change between what we budgeted versus what we're projecting. So for property taxes, there's no change from budget to projected. Currently, we've received $665,000. We'll receive most of the property tax revenues come in around January. The bills go out in the fall. So we'll see increases probably around January for property taxes. Sales tax, you'll see a slight difference, a 0.2% change from budget to projected. The sales came in a little bit better than we projected. Keep in mind that sales tax reporting, there's a 3-month lag in what we receive. And so these are really April numbers. People received stimulus package, stimulus checks, and so there may have been a slight uptick. And so we'll just need to monitor sales tax going forward. So this number will fluctuate. Most of the other categories, there's no change. I will point out that the intergovernmental revenues, those revenues include utility sales tax, gasoline tax, beer and wine tax, ABC store allocations. Those are the type of revenues under that particular category. And the major driver of the decrease is in the utility sales tax, which I'll mention in a later chart. The ABC store revenues are also fall under this, and we're actually seeing increases in that particular revenue. But collectively, there's a 1.2% decrease in intergovernmental revenues. So moving on to the first graph, this is our sales tax by sales month. So you can see some month-to-month trends for sales tax. Once again, since there's a lag in the reporting of sales tax, you'll see this particular graph start in April because that was the reporting period that we received in July. You'll see a slight black line, so that will show you the slight increase that I mentioned before in the sales tax for our April distribution. And so as each month we'll update this particular slide and we project that it will fluctuate. The previous year in sales tax was lower than trend, and so that's why our projections are actually slightly better than once projected.
Ms. Tony, on that graph, since we're 3 months low, does that go into that we would have got in July? Does that go into this year's budget or last year's budget?
It'll report for this current fiscal year. It's just
so we do that on a cash basis?
Yeah. Councilmember Clark, it actually gets reported in fiscal 20.
Okay, so you have to accrue.
We've got 3 months we've got to accrue into fiscal 20. So fiscal 20 has not closed yet.
Okay, so really the months for the current year budget I got to worry about are the ones that start in July.
That's correct.
Okay. I hope you guessed right for last year's budget. Okay, thank you. Ms. Tony, please continue.
Okay. Moving on to the next chart is the occupancy taxes by month. So you don't see any actuals to date. The The city received approximately $754,000 in occupancy tax in FY21. So that missed the budget by about 20%. We budgeted $944,000. So you see the trend of decline for occupancy tax, and the projections probably will look the same for this FY21.
Why don't we have any numbers yet? Why wouldn't we have June and July's? Does it lag also?
Yes, there'll be a lag in reporting for occupancy tax. We'll get that. And so we just don't have those numbers quite yet.
Okay, yes, it says that there's a lag. Okay. So we'll fill that one in as the time goes by. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Okay. The following is the utility franchise tax. And so in this is electricity, natural gas consumption, telecommunications, and video programming. This shows a trend down, about $375,000 that has missed the projected budget. There's a number of reasons or potential reasons for this level of decrease. One is that the number of hot days indicating less cold days, and therefore there's a decline in the use of electricity and natural gas consumption. Also, for telecommunications, taxes continue to decline as consumers are switching to cell phone service versus landline. So there's a decrease in landline use, and so there you'll see a decrease in telecommunications. The third area is video programming. The trend there is consumers are what they're calling cutting the cord from cable and more in favor of streaming type services for their television viewing. So the adopted budget assumes a 1% growth over each quarter in FY21. The next distribution will be received in September and reflecting the April through June 2020 quarter.
Okay.
Moving on to the Winston-Salem Fairgrounds Fund, looking at our reserves. The Fairground Funds, of course, includes the Carolina Classic Fair as well as non-fair events. You'll notice on the graph a significant decrease for FY21, and that is the assumption that we know for sure will not be a fair for FY21. You'll see a continuous decline in the reserves. Unless we somehow subsidize the reserves to the Fairgrounds Fund, you'll continue to see a decline in that fund. And then the last chart graph is parking fund reserves. As you recall, during COVID-19, we did not collect any parking deck fees. The graph also assumes that there are some planned repairs to the City Hall South deck. And then the third issue is that during the budget process, we removed the general fund subsidy to the parking fund. And so that's why you see a continuous decline in this fund as well.
Okay.
That concludes the report.
Okay, come back when you have good news.
Okay.
Mr. McIntosh, you have the floor.
Patrice, I had a question on your first chart under the transfers in.
Yes.
Tell me what that row constitutes.
Okay, transfers in, those are transfers from other funds like Community Development Block Grant, Housing Finance Assistance Funds, Stormwater Fund, and Water and Sewer Utility Fund.
Okay, and explain to me why 21 budget is so far above 20 actual.
I think it's just the reporting of it. I think next month this will look better, but those actuals gets tricky in terms of the delay in reporting. I think finance is working to close out FY20 and that just hasn't happened yet. And so when we get updated information, that will look more.
So it'll net out about the same over the
Yes.
period. Okay, thank you very much.
Any other? Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Tony, for that update. I look forward to seeing one every month. Could I get a little more information on when we're going into the reserves at the fairgrounds and in parking? You're talking about going to those reserves. How big are those reserves, and how deep are we going into them? I mean, I don't know where the bottom is to our reserve pool here.
Well, you see the reserve, both of the fairgrounds and the parking fund. I mean, we are in the minus of those reserves. For the fairground, the projection with not having a fair for FY21, which is the 2020 fair, we're looking at minus $450,000, and the continuous reduction in those reserves. The parking fund, we're just kind of below where we should be in reserves. That will continue if we don't add back either the subsidy that we have done in past years, which was like $500,000. We could probably get back in line to where we need to be for the parking fund.
So if I can understand correctly, by not having the fair, we're going into debt by $600,000 or so. Is that approximate number?
For FY21, it'll be about $500,000, and then going out projecting FY22 and 23, yes, closer to the 600.
So we do not have a bucket of cash in a reserve account. Where's this money going to come from the deficit that's going to be created by not running the fair this year?
Yes, that's what we would have to discuss, and it would be an option for council to consider. How do we potentially subsidize the fair fund going forward? So those would be some conversations we would definitely need to have.
So when we say we're going into the reserve, there is no reserve particularly other than our general operating budget or our cash reserves by the city as a whole. There's no fairground, there's no designated money specifically for the fair operation that's from surplus previous years. Is that?
There was, Mr. Larson. We had at the end of, we projected the end of June to have $1.5 million, and we're projecting at June of 2021 to have overdrawn it by $500,000. That's a $2 million cash hit.
That's exactly the question.
And we don't bounce checks, so obviously we will have to transfer some money in there. Same thing with the parking fund. We're taking about a $1.3 million cash pull. I think these charts are very enlightening because we seem to concentrate on the general fund, which is also going down, but we've got these odds and ends funds that are just being decimated. And this is almost $3.5 million here alone. Mr. McIntosh.
Yeah,
Mr. Larson, wait a minute. Ms. Larson, we answer your question.
Yeah, that answered the question. It's not a happy picture.
No, it's not. Yeah. As I told her, she's going to come back with better news next time. Mr. McIntosh and then Ms. Scipio.
Yeah, one thing we can do before we consider a big capital outlay on the parking fund reserves is we charge 25 cents an hour for parking. We are way, way, way behind our other peer cities in what we charge. So it won't fill the gap, but it's a good start to think about gradually increasing that, starting out going to 50 cents an hour and working from there, because that's a really scary. At least the fairgrounds fund, going into 18 into 19, we had some increase there, but the parking fund reserves have been on their way down for quite some time.
Yeah, a number of years previously. Well, Ms. Scipio.
Yes, I just want to get a little more clarity on the fairground reserve and the issue we're seeing there. Are we saying by keeping the fairgrounds open and staffed as it is currently, we're going to have to take that hit of almost $500,000?
Yes, that is correct. There are some expenditures, some ongoing expenditures with staffing and non-fair events that will go on, including the hit from the fair and the inability to bring in revenues from that. So yes, a combination of both of those things will keep us below the line in a deficit for the next several fiscal years unless we add some kind of subsidy to it.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess at some point we really need to have a deep dive on what we're going to be doing with the fairground.
Yeah, yeah. Good point. Hopefully this is an aberration, but it's a bad, not having a fair is tough. Yeah. Good point. Mr. McIntosh.
Yeah, are these at least this sharp drop, can any of that be addressed if we get money from DC? Can we point to those as COVID-related expenditures or COVID-related revenue losses? I mean, there's structural problems with the parking fund, but it seems to me like the fairground fund should bounce back once we get back to post-COVID.
And definitely look into that.
Yeah, I mean, this is being my take on it would be that if we were able to receive federal money for replacement revenue, lost revenue, that's certainly one choice that council can make, is to allocate part of those dollars to sustaining the fairgrounds fund and even potentially the parking fund.
Okay. Let me suggest this, folks. I got 4 more to get through in the next 40 minutes. This is just informational. Ms. Tony, I would suggest for the next month that you include the mass transit fund. I know we got a lot of COVID money in there, but we're spending it on buses, but that fund's been pulled significantly as well. But I do expect the staff, and this is a very good start, to keep us posted on a real-time monthly basis on how all this is going. And Mr. McIntosh, one question you brought up, which is, and Miss Adams is working on this, is what can we use money we get COVID money for? Some things I read say we cannot use it to replace lost revenue. Other things say we can. So we'll deal with that as we get it. So anyway, G2 is just for informational purposes. Thank y'all very much. G3.
Item G3, consideration of items relating to the use of coronavirus relief funds, resolution approving the use of coronavirus relief funds, and authorizing the city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement with Forsyth County for the grant of those funds. Ordinance amending the annual appropriation and tax levy ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem for the fiscal year 2020-2021, and ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem for fiscal year 2020-2021.
Mr. Rao, why don't you give us some history here and what's going on?
Yes, sir, Chairman Clark. So in March, Congress passed what's called the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or short, we call it the CARES Act, which created a federal coronavirus relief fund and provided $150 billion to state and local governments with populations over 500,000. North Carolina received about $7.6 billion, and the state created its own coronavirus relief fund, initially releasing $150 million of a potential $300 million relief fund to the counties. At that time, the county received about $6.5 million and allocated about $1 million to the municipalities within the county, which included $774,000 to Winston-Salem. And subsequent to that, the governor and the state released the second $150 million. So they basically released the full $300 million that was in that coronavirus relief fund to the counties, with the stipulation that 25% of the money would be distributed to the municipalities within the county. So altogether, Forsyth County received $13.9 million. They just this past Thursday passed a resolution to distribute just under $3.5 million to the municipalities within the county. And of that total, Winston-Salem is set to receive $2,690,204. These funds have to be used for COVID-19 related expenditures. So whether it's payroll expenses for employees whose services are substantially dedicated to mitigating and responding to the COVID-19 public health emergency, or providing economic support in connection with COVID-19, or anything that follows the U.S. Treasury guidelines for the uses of these funds. So the item before you today is a two-part resolution. One, approving the city's use of the funds, and then secondly, approving the interlocal agreement that the county will require the municipalities to sign to receive the funds. Under this state law, the counties have to submit their plans for the use of their distribution of the funds by September 1st. So we have to submit a plan to the county, by then. The proposal for the city's use of the funds is to use those dollars to cover existing public safety salaries for sworn police and certified fire personnel that are paid during the current fiscal year 2020-2021. So that is the proposal for the use of the funds. There's a budget amendment that's attached to this item, and what it shows basically is that we would take the full $2,690,000 and charge it off to our public safety budgets to cover those existing public safety salaries. That would come back in as a revenue to the general fund, which means that we could reduce the fund balance appropriation that was budgeted to balance the budget at the beginning of the year. But in addition to the use of the funds, the budget amendment also includes appropriating $1 million of that interfund revenue coming back to the police budget for the Community Investments Review Committee. They are currently meeting about every other week to look at possible uses of $1 million for various projects or programs to address social issues of social injustice and equity in the community. And so $1 million would be appropriated as part of this amendment for the Community Investment Review Committee to recommend a distribution of those funds. I have to answer any questions.
That was a mouthful, Mr. Rao. Thank you. I would ask, in your opinion, do these uses meet the federal requirements as outlined?
Yes, the staff was very careful about identifying how we plan to use the funds, and using it to cover existing public safety salaries is an accepted and eligible use of the dollars, because our firefighters, our police, are responding oftentimes to COVID-19 related emergencies. Mm-hmm. And so we have to provide the documentation showing that, but we feel that we can certainly do that. And so that's what we will reflect in the municipality plan that we have to submit to the county.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments?
Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Taylor.
I just want to thank Mr. Rao for putting this presentation together. This is something that I believe I can support. I mean, it makes sense to support our public safety personnel who put their lives on the line every single day to make sure we're safe. And I think that's what we're about in this city, public safety. But also, I want to say thank you to the Community Investments Review Committee that meets regularly to try to find ways that we can reduce poverty and that we can reduce crime in our cities. I'm happy that this item also allocates that $1 million that we discussed to this committee to allow the people to decide where that money goes to make a real difference and an impact in the city of Winston-Salem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Ms. Scipio, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just for clarity, and I don't know if we've actually voted on this, but if we have these funds going into public safety to cover those salaries, then can that $2,690,000 can that go right back into our reserves?
Yes.
So to build that back up, but I don't think we have actually voted on that happening. I think we were waiting on money to come.
Yes, yeah, and the money has come or is coming, yeah.
All right. And just Chairman Clark, just for a point of clarity, if you look at the budget amendment included with the package, what it shows is the fund balance appropriation. So the budgeted use of fund balance decreasing by $1,690,204. So so just want to make sure that it wouldn't be a dollar for dollar, case.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Taylor, I believe you made a motion to approve this.
If I did not, I do make a motion to approve it.
Oh, excuse me. Mr. Taylor's made a motion to approve. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. By the way, for those of you who are on this remotely, we're having some terrible storm downtown, so we may well lose power. We've just finished disconnecting the computer so we don't get a surge through it. So bear with me here. We have a motion and a second to approve G3. I will then call the roll. Ms. Adams? Yes. Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
And Mr. Clark votes yes. That is G3. And I will keep going. G4, if the secretary read that, please.
Item G4, consideration of information on a resolution amending Article 2 of the City of Winston-Salem resolution to combine position classifications in pay grades 1 and 2 into pay grade 3 in order to increase the minimum hourly rate to 14.31.
Mr. Rao, could you introduce this to us, please?
Yes, sir, Chairman Clark. So this item is a request from Mayor Pro Tempore Adams to continue to discuss increasing the city's minimum hourly rate from $13 an hour to $14.31 an hour. Just a brief history here. Back in June of 2018, as part of the adoption of the 2018-19 budget, the mayor and city council adopted a resolution that made various changes to the city's pay plan, implementing a number of the market adjustments that had been studied, and also established a goal to increase the minimum hourly rate to $15 by 2021. You can see there with the chart, how we've done, how the council has approved these minimum hourly rate increases over the last several years. So going from 2016-17, where it was $11 an hour, to the $13 an hour that we currently pay, and it's an 18% increase over those 4 years. So back prior to the pandemic, and when we were doing the early budget forecasting, the budget evaluation staff had incorporated into the early budget projections increasing the minimum hourly rate to $14.31. And the reason why it was $14.31 is we were looking at basically combining pay grades 1 and 2 into pay grade 3, because the minimum rate for a pay grade 3 position was $14.31. So we felt like that we could do that and have minimal compression as far as supervisors of those positions making close to the amount of the folks that they would supervise. The projected cost of that increase was $393,000 for all funds. The impact on the general fund would be $333,000. However, with the pandemic and the fiscal challenges that we were facing, the increase to the minimum hourly rate was not part of the adopted 2021 budget. So the item before you today is a request from Mayor Pro Tem Adams to revisit the issue. Increasing the minimum hourly rate would benefit 79 full-time employees and 33 part-time employees. In the council action, you can see the list of the position classifications that would be moved into pay grade 3. Just to give you a sense of what's already in pay grade 3, the positions in that grade include an accounting clerk, administrative intern, lake attendant, maintenance worker, office assistant, painter, parking enforcement officer, parts technician, service writer, survey worker, vehicle operator, and weighmaster. So you really don't have the supervisors of these grades 1 and 2 positions really included in pay grade 3. That's why we feel like that we could increase the minimum rate to $14.31 without creating a lot of issues with compression. The chart you see before you here just shows how our current minimum hourly rate compares to the other large cities in the state, as well as Forsyth County and North Carolina and the U.S. government. And we're right in the middle right now. We're right in the middle right now. So this is an information item. There's no funding source identified as part of this information item, but we did want the staff to bring this forward at the request of Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Ms. Adams, would you like to comment?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair Clark. Again, I think it's very important that we realize the significant impact on our employees and their families and the community's life with this pay step. Unfortunately, COVID happened, but this step, if COVID hadn't happened, was going to happen. And I think it's imperative that the council, again, look at this information. I task or implore staff to go find the funding to make this pay step happen. Again, I feel like if we miss a step in what we've been doing, And I know there are other issues, but the issue of quality life, pay, is at the top of the list. And I just feel like we have got to find the sources, Mr. Garrity, Chairman Clark, Finance, members of the council, the mayor. I think it's imperative that we want to talk about social justice issues and equitable issues. Main thing is pay. If you look at the chart that's been provided for you to show where we are compared to other larger cities, and with Charlotte moving fast. I know Charlotte is a state all by itself, but those cities are moving to get to $20 an hour. If we continue to not try to make that stride on the plan that we all agreed on before COVID, then we will be that much further behind our sister cities in trying to attract talent and people wanting to work for our city. I know one of the things that we talk about is how over the years we've increased public safety pay. Those jobs are important, but any job to me with the city of Winston-Salem is important. And therefore, I feel like that it is our duty and responsibility, because of again, employees are at the very low end of the pay scale. The fact that we're talking about compressing a couple of pay grades to make this work, I am asking the council, the mayor, and Sheriff Clark, that we need to go find, and the city manager, we need to go find the $333 to make some lives happier during this terrible time of COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Scipio, did you raise your hand?
I did indeed.
I see you. Go right ahead.
All right. I really think that it is always good to pay fair wages for all employees. My concern right now is, number one, we haven't identified a source for these funds and an ongoing source. And I'm very nervous about where we're going to end up financially as a city. So I am very much in favor of a pay increase, but I don't know if this is the right time at the beginning of our fiscal year. I would prefer that we actually do this or come back to it after we've got more numbers in with our own finances. And then I also am concerned that from going to $13 to $14.31 is a 10% pay increase. And I know other people look at things, and we, last time we gave our other employees was 2% increase. And I just sort of try to figure out what's the balance we're going to tell employees. If you give some group 10 because they're below and then others nothing. I think making it equitable, making it fair takes a little more thought than just jumping to a level. I like to see, Mr. Rao, what the numbers would be if we went to $14 or $13.50. I saw the increases have been more modest in the past. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Scipio. Mr. Larson, I see your hand. Go ahead. Mr. Larson, you're on mute. You're still on mute. You look good, but we can't hear you. Mr. Larson, if you can hear me, raise your hand. Okay, we can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
For a second you were on, you were there, and then it came back on again.
Hang on a minute. There we go. Ms. Scipio, thank you very much.
I need professional help here.
Yeah.
Let me just comment that the people we're talking about right now are the people that oftentimes interface with the public. We have sanitation workers. We have people that are working in custodial. We have secretarial help. These are important people to the city. And right now they're earning about $27,000 a year. That's not a livable wage. We're talking about taking them up to getting them up to maybe 29,000, which is still in my mind problematic if you look at the cost of living and where we are. We are behind the ball here. I don't know where this money is coming from. We just approved some COVIS money to send that back into our general fund. I would like us to look seriously at trying to find some way to take care of our people. It affects, as we know, the cutbacks that are being made at the federal level. There's no question it's a tight budget, and I appreciate what our city manager is facing. But on the other hand, our economy is based on sort of the minimum wage. And if we're going to have a vibrant, employable workforce in the city, we need to be competitive. And so I am supportive of trying to move it up, whether it's, I don't really understand 31 cents, quite honestly. I got an explanation of that. But if we can move up at least to 14, I think that would be a positive step, something to show that we are in fact continuing to move and we're not growing dormant on it. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. McIntosh, you have the floor.
I fully support this, Dee Dee. Thank you for pushing this. I also look forward to the creativity of staff coming up with the money. I also want to challenge council members to think about where they can cut 1/8 of $300 and some thousand from their own wish list. We have we got a really tough budget to begin with. The ability for us as council members to ask for additional things is just, it's not there. It's going away. I'm going to go look, I'm going to talk with staff to see what I can find, where I can come up with 1/8 of that, because I think in this go around, this is where that money is going to do more for the city of Winston-Salem than in our pet projects. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just offer one comment. This is for information today. And Mr. Rao, I think you've heard a couple questions that people would like to get answers. Mr. Taylor, I see you're up, or I'll hold my comments to you speak. Mr. Taylor.
Well, I'll speak briefly, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Pro Tem Adams, I support your initiative to raise the wage. I'm open to figuring out how we can be creative to get this done. So it makes sense why we support our city employees at this time, and we should be creative to try to do it. So thank you for bringing this forward, and I'm happy to try to do my part to get to the 1/8 on my end. Thank you, Councilman.
Okay. Thank y'all, and all very good comments. I would like to offer one thought. We have already learned today that we're taking a $2 million cash hit to the fair, and what was it, $1.3 million to the parking. It was an interesting article when they released the second quarter GDP when it dropped 30% on an annualized basis. Hidden in the press release from the government is the fact that disposable personal income actually went up in second quarter. My point being that the $1,200 the government paid plus the $600 a week extra unemployment more than compensated for the lost wages in that personal income actually went up. My point is we have yet to see, I think, the true impact of this recession. I think we will start to see that as that $600 dwindles away and as that $1,200. There may still be one more check coming, but those are one-time type events, especially given and what's going to happen. My guess is as good as anybody, but it looks like at the earliest we're going to have a vaccine at the end of the year. And I don't think it's unreasonable to project that it will be mid-year of 2021 before we, quote, get back to normal. I think that puts the April $750,000 payment on the ballpark in question and a number of other things. Bottom line is I am supportive of paying our employees more, particularly those on the bottom, but we need to know where we are. And as Ms. Scipio said, I think in a little bit more time, we'll have a much better feel of where we are, but it's certainly something well worth considering. Let me move on, guys. I got 25 minutes and two important things. Next is the upgrade on Bowman Gray Stadium. I think this is very timely given that it's not being used. So Mr. Rao, why don't you comment where we are there?
Yes, sir, Chairman Clark, and I think everybody knows the history and where we are, what's got us to this point. I'm excited to report that the design team has been working very diligently since late last year, working with our contractor, Frank L. Bloom Construction and WC Construction on coming up and finalizing the design for the stadium. A lot of this information is in the information item. I do want to just kind of go over that very briefly. Got some renderings here I'm going to walk through very quickly. But so first off, we are planning to construct 2 new restroom facilities. You can see those in this particular rendering. There will be dynamic signage there where we can switch it out during racing season, and then it can be changed over to signage for Winston-Salem Stadium football season. So new restroom facilities there that will double the number of women's fixtures, which is much needed in the stadium. And then in addition to the new restroom facilities, we're building 2 new concession stands. So basically the old concession stands, we've got 3 of them, and the restroom facilities, I think we got maybe 6 or 7 of those. All of those will be demolished and replaced with these new facilities. The concession stands will include mostly new equipment. They'll be air conditioned so we can comply with health codes, and their layouts will be such that'll facilitate more efficient operation by our concessionaire. In addition to these facilities, we're also still planning to regrade the football field. Football field is in great need of some work, including the installation of a new irrigation system, resurfacing the track. You can see there in this particular rendering. Also doing some HVAC replacements in the field house, some utility upgrades, and also making some improvements to the flooring in the corridor leading into the athletic department's office suite. So all of these items are considered part of the base scope of the project. And these are elements that I think we've talked about since the beginning, since the announcement of this project, of the most critical needs for the stadium. We also have included some ad alternates in the scope. And I think that one flashed up here just a second ago, but one ad alternate is to install canopies at the 3 entrances to the stadium, provide some cover for the ticket booths, and for potentially down the road, if we deploy metal detectors. Also new HVAC units in the roof on the west press box, a new video board, some parking improvements in the east lot, and some removable signage. These are ad alternates. We would not pursue these improvements if the funding is not available. So we wanted to scale this project in such a way that we could stay within budget. If you look at the item in your agenda, $9 million is the total budget right now, based on the estimates that Frank L. Bloom has developed. We're looking at estimated total costs of just under $9 million. So we feel like that we've got the project scoped responsibly. I think one of the benefits of the fact that we're using this construction manager at risk method for this project is that the contractor has been working with the architect from day one. And so we've been value engineering and making choices, quite honestly, as we have been designing the project. And so that's where we are at this point. The construction drawings, I think, are about complete. Frank L. Bloom is ready to now go out and start the bidding process. This is part of developing what's called the guaranteed maximum price. So they're going through that process. That's going to take several weeks for them to advertise, to receive bids, to evaluate the bids, make sure that we achieve the type of NWB participation that we hope for from our subcontractors. And so it'll take some time to do that, but our hope is to come back to the council with an action item at the first Monday meeting in October. So rather than coming back through committees, we would like to expedite the process a bit and bring an action item right back to council that first Monday in October, so that if that's approved, if you approve that, the guaranteed maximum price, we can start mobilizing and actually start working the stadium towards the end of October, and really try to take advantage of the fact that while it's unfortunate that we don't have racing, we don't have football, there is an opportunity for us to get started on this project earlier than we would have if those seasons had taken place. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? This is for information only. Ben, I do like the idea of proceeding. We do have extra time with no football this fall, and to get a jump on it sounds like a great idea. Mr. Mayor, you have a comment?
Yeah, just real quickly, Ben, that looks really good. I assume you're keeping Chancellor Robinson and the staff with some state up to speed. And by the way, the turf in those renderings looked Awesome. I don't think that's AstroTurf, is it?
No, sir, it's grass. It would be a little beyond the budget from what I understand.
Right, thank you.
Yes, sir, we are keeping the university officials briefed on this. My point of contact is Vice Chancellor Constance Millett, and we've included them in the scope meetings as well as officials with Winston-Salem Speedway Inc.
Good. Thank you, Ben.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Scipio, you're up.
Mr. Chair, one of the things that I continue to remind Mr. Rao about is if we can do it sooner, let's get it done. If we can get something to the council in September instead of October, that will make this process really work well, because we really want to take advantage of the football season not being there and get a lot done before the race season starts in the spring. So I think it's a wonderful process that we're going through, and the work, the drawings, the things that are going to happen are going to really make that stadium look really good with the budget we have to work with.
Ms. Scipio, very good point. And it kind of gets cold around here in January, so we may lose a little time there. So the sooner we can start, the better. Thank you, Ben. That's a nice update. I look forward to it. Folks, this is a whole new concept of building this contractor at risk, and I look forward to the results. The last item is information. No, it's not. I got two more items.
Got two more. Oh, gosh, you got two.
And I don't have enough time. Let me comment. The share market is on general government tomorrow, is it not, Ms. Adams?
Yes.
So if we don't have time for it, it will be presented in its entirety tomorrow, and Ms. Adams and I both on that committee. Of course, everyone else can listen in. So we'll now go to the information on potential process changes for community agencies. If the city, I've been calling her secretary, the city clerk will please read this.
Item G6, information on potential process changes for community agency funding and contracting.
Whoever would like the floor can have it.
Chairman Clark, I'm going to recognize Scott Tash, who is our Performance and Accountability Director. He will present this item.
Mr. Tash, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the City Council. As part of the FY21 budget process, council members provided some feedback to staff that they might like to see some process improvements in the community agencies' funding and contracting processes. And so this information item and presentation is designed to garner some feedback from City Council on some opportunities to make changes. Meredith, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So the goals of these process changes would be fourfold here. The first, to provide opportunities for new or other agencies to gain access to community agency funding. So we heard comments to the effect of, it seems sometimes that the same agencies get funding. How do we provide additional opportunities? To provide a little more strategic direction on the use of funding. So how programmatically we might want to use community agency funding. To provide more accountability for agencies' use of city funds in terms of evaluation, monitoring, and auditing. And then if we want to achieve any specific outcomes, this links back to the second bullet point, but do we want to provide more direction on exactly what we expect from community agencies with respect to the funding that they receive? So Meredith, if you'll go to the next slide there. This is just quickly the FY 2021 budget summary for community agency funding. You've got two columns there. The one on the left is what we'd call local dollars, so general fund and occupancy tax fund. The light blue at the bottom are the funded requests, so roughly $1.2 million in funded requests. And then the dark blue, 2.2 million are unfunded requests. The column there on the right would be CDBG, Home, ESG, and Housing Finance Assistance Funds, so our low income and housing funds. You can see 1.7 million roughly funded, about 1.2 million unfunded requests. Just to give some context there, so you see in the general fund and occupancy tax fund, a much higher percentage of funded requests. Go to the next slide there. So in order to put these ideas together and into context, staff really looked at trying to put them into 5 different categories. There is some overlap between these, but we're going to talk about the application in terms of what the community agency might see when applying for funds. Selection and funding, I'm going to reverse those. Funding, meaning how much money we would make available for community agencies, and selection, what criteria we might use to select community agencies for funding. Contracting, how we might structure the contracts differently to provide a little more accountability. Monitoring in terms of contract administration during the contract period, and then auditing, really looking at the evaluation and auditing after the contract had ended or at an ending phase near the end of the cycle. I do want to note that many of these ideas have come from other jurisdictions, whether they be in North Carolina or things that we have seen elsewhere. We will also note in several places, some of these things are going to apply differently to different funding sources. So what we can do with general fund and occupancy tax fund dollars is going to be a little different than what we can do with our federal pass-through money. So when we're talking about potential changes, we will be bringing back, based on what you'd like to see, an action item or series of action items to make potential changes, but they may be different based on the funding source that's used for different community agencies. So next slide, please. So in terms of the application, one of the things that we see in other jurisdictions and what we've heard from CAC and from City Council is this idea of, well, we provide operating assistance. It seems that we've continued to provide operating assistance to some of the same community agencies. There are cities that have moved away from doing operating assistance and will only fund startup or capital funding. So if you have a new program, they will help you get off the ground. If you have some capital needs, be it infrastructure or otherwise, they will help out with that. That means phasing out current operating funding. So we have quite a few community agencies who receive a substantial amount of money on an ongoing basis, essentially through the process. So if you were to do this, it could mean substantially changing who receives money and how they receive it. Just putting there potential exceptions, what I just talked about, the Arts Council and Old Salem are two of those larger community agencies that receive ongoing funding. The idea behind this is to strive for self-sufficiency in the program, to get the 501c3 to really provide their own financing mechanism for their own project or program over time. The next idea from other jurisdictions is a maximum city contribution. Oh, if you'll pop, there we go, to a program or budget. This could be either in terms of a flat maximum, so say $25,000, which is something similar to what the city of Raleigh does, or it can be capped as a percentage of a total budget. You'd say we don't want to fund more than a third of a program budget or project budget for a community agency. This could have the effect of freeing up funds currently budgeted or the amounts currently budgeted to be able to distribute to more community agencies. A note there, some agencies are very large and have one specific program they're looking for funding for, and some agencies are very small and have only one program. So you may, in effect, in some places, be funding the entire agency or a percentage of the entire agency. Next slide. So funding and selection. In terms of funding, we're talking about how you make money available for the community agency funding process. This bullet point that we have here, total funding tied to specific revenue streams, and in the example, the tax rate equivalent is something that Cary has been doing for quite some time. And what they've said essentially is we want to provide a half a penny on the tax rate for community agencies. And so as the property tax base increases, so does the amount of funding that would go to community agencies. So there is a known set amount, particularly from the general fund, again, that would be made available. We've done this in part with occupancy tax revenues in the past, where when they have gone up, we have likened the raises in occupancy tax funded 501c3s by whatever the increase was year over year. I think that's a little different this year with what's going on, obviously related to the recession and COVID. But the idea here is tying funding to a specific revenue stream so you know exactly what's going to be available in any given year. The next component there, selection, and I want to be very careful in saying that the example here is only for illustrative purposes, and we would come back with something much more substantial in terms of a recommendation. But you see a lot of cities that instead of making a pot of money generally available to 501c3s, that are very specific in how they want to use the money in program areas. And so here we've looked at economic development and innovation, affordable housing, which is a strategic plan priority. We are the city of arts and innovation, and then a lot of them still have that other or human services catch-all. The idea here would be to narrow the field of vision on how you would use money and what you would want from 501c3s. So as they're applying for funding, they would much more specifically know what does the city want to get for the money that it's spending. The next slide, please. One of the other things that we looked at is this idea of zero basing, particularly for the Community Agency Allocation Committee. They, from time to time, have said it feels like we have to give them what we gave them last year, or they look at last year's funding recommendations as a baseline. You could say, absolutely not, we don't want to do that. It's very similar to the bullet point on not providing continuing operating assistance, but you could do it, just not base it on whatever a prior year was. Next slide, please. So contracting, two things here. The first one is a performance-based competitive application process. We have in parentheses there an RFP process. What this really means is more of a competitive federal grant type process where the city would set out on the front end what we expect, and then the community agencies would have to fill out an application saying how they fit into that. Right now, we ask them how they fit into our strategic priorities, and it's kind of a how do you fit into livable neighborhoods, or how do you fit into an objective? It would be much more specific. Applicants would be scored on their ability to meet the program guidelines that we put forward, and we would use performance-based contracting in creating the contracts. I do want to say this is a substantial change from what we're currently doing and would take a significant amount of time to implement. Many of these have different timelines. This one's probably the longest. It would take a good amount of staff research and time and working with City Council to figure out exactly how we would create the programs that community agencies would apply for. The next bullet point is performance-based contracting itself. So currently, our community agency contracts have performance metrics in them. The difference in using a performance-based contracting model would be tying the final payouts to goal achievement. So essentially, find a way to prorate the payments if they were unable to meet the requirements of the contract. So if you said you were going to help 100 people and you helped 75 at the end of the year, we would only cut you a check for 75% of whatever you were allocated at the beginning of the year. Next slide, please. So the next couple here, moving forward, more monitoring and auditing related. Contract monitoring, on-site evaluations. These could be done by staff or by staff assisting the Community Allocation Committee. Give us a chance to look at the physical space where services are actually being rendered, potentially talk to clients or see those services being rendered on site, which council members have specifically said they'd like to have happen, and would give staff an opportunity to do some preliminary backup documentation review for auditing purposes or for at least grant monitoring purposes. This would probably require additional resources to do, particularly given the number of community agencies that we have. And I would note again, this would be more specific to general fund and occupancy tax fund community agencies. Some of the ones that get federal pass-through money are already having evaluations done that are part of federal processes. So any report we bring back to you would detail the difference between kind of locally funded options and what's already a process for federal money. Next slide. Auditing, so we could also do contract audits. In the past, we've done some reviews of community agencies. They were not substantial in nature. This would be significantly more substantial. It would be a focus on performance and lesser on whether they have a policy that has the correct internal controls in it. We'd be much more worried about, did they get done what they said they were going to do, as opposed to, did they just have the boxes checked on the application. Assurance that those performance goals are met on an annual basis. That workloads and outcomes are adequately documented. So we would perform these audits and review their backup documentation, and would also look at the city's contract administration. So if the internal audit division were to do this, it's not only how well is the community agency performing, but how well are we meeting our objective requirements of the contract as well. These are not currently in the city internal audit division's work plan. So this would be a little bit of a move and shift in their work plan. So we'd have to talk about what that means. Current projects that they work on. Next slide, please. So I'm trying to get through this as quick as I can. It's an extremely dense subject, the number of things that we have here. The idea, what we're looking for from council is tell us which ones of these bullet points you would like us to do additional research and potentially bring back recommendations for changes on. We didn't want to waste a significant amount of staff time doing something that council wasn't interested in. So we would love to just—
Todd, can I interrupt you there? Because I've only got a few more minutes here. Very good presentation. There's an awful lot of meat in this. I would suggest that you proactively contact each council member at a convenient time and maybe walk through each one of those bullet points. There's some I liked, some I didn't, and everyone's going to be a little different, but I think you need to get all 8 folks' input, plus the mayor. Ms. Scipio?
Yes, I do have a question. Did you talk to, did you get feedback from the agencies that have received funds and those who didn't receive funds to come up with this? Or was this just internal within the city?
So at this point, this is just internal to the city. I think if we moved forward and did research, that we could get input from community agencies on the process currently, how it exists and what they might feel about future changes. But this was based on what we heard from council and what we've seen in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, okay. I would recommend that you also talk to some of your key funded agencies, because when I was in nonprofit, I found your whole process very difficult for small nonprofits that don't have a large staff to do the paperwork. So I would really ask you to look at all of the nonprofits or get some feedback from them.
Okay. We're going to pass G7 on to general government tomorrow. I'm not trying to slide it. I want to be sure they get plenty of time, and it is on the agenda. I would like to conclude by reiterating to the staff, and I don't know if this is the mayor's final decision, I think we need to look seriously if we possibly can have in-person meetings. I happen to watch the county commissioners the other night. They had their whole meeting in person. Now they're in a big room. We're in a big room. We can easily social distance in here. It is difficult to conduct these meetings and and I try to treat everybody fairly, calling everybody that speaks. It also has greatly reduced the amount of interaction with the public. We just don't have anybody or very little for public comments and this, that, the other. So I just leave you with that thought, Mr. City Manager and everybody else. And I realize it's easier said than done. But anyway, with that, we will stand adjourned, and public safety is up next. And Mr. Taylor, how about in about 5 minutes?
My understanding that we're going to switch rooms and get started as quickly as we can.
Okay, you got it. I'm gone. Thank you.